Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us remotely, we have John Copeland. He's the Marketing and Consumer Insights Lead at Adobe, and we're going to learn about the Digital Economy Index from Adobe Analytics. John, it's great to have you back with me as always, and truly, we are a digital economy. That's what's keeping us going right now. Tell us more about the Digital Economy Index, and even going back to January, did you think we would be where we are? I mean, it's almost impossible to model out just how important the digital economy is.
Yeah, hi Jill. Thanks for having me on. We are super excited at Adobe to actually have this digital economy index, and you're absolutely right. When we built it, we had no way of knowing or expecting how relevant it would be right now. And just so folks know, the Digital Economy Index actually takes all of the data that the industry-leading Adobe Analytics toolkit can aggregate, really around hundreds of millions of, actually trillions of visits that people make to online retail sites across hundreds of millions of products and thousands of retailers to allow us to get a truly comprehensive view of the digital economy. We're excited because we think particularly times like now can be super helpful for consumers, for businesses, and for policymakers in terms of understanding consumer behavior online, comparing that to offline, and figuring out, how to take advantage of things like the best days to buy certain products, understanding digital purchasing power. You could almost think of it as sort of the digital version of the consumer price index overall. And as you might imagine, we're seeing huge changes in consumer behavior, particularly right now with the whole COVID-19 and everybody sheltering in place.
Yeah, and if we take a look at our first slide here, online price changes by category, we can see the uptick and also the downtick in some of those categories. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the beauty of what we built here is we can look over 6 years worth of data at the category level to understand how online prices have changed. And for certain categories like electronics and computers, for example, over that 6-year period, there's been a fair amount of deflation. And in fact, consumers can actually buy if you look at that chart, right, computers and electronics go down about 40% in online prices over that period of time. Other categories, though, stay relatively stable. There's a lot less opportunity for price deflation in those categories, things like groceries online, which are super relevant right now. What we do is aggregate all of that information to come up with what we call consumers' digital purchasing power. And one of the things that we've seen over the last 6 years is that digital purchasing power across all of these categories at an aggregated level has gone up over 20%.
Wow, that's a pretty big number. And anecdotally, when you're talking about the move in electronics, I mean, look at the price for a 60-inch flat screen TV relative to what it was 10 years ago. My first flat screen was, I think, over $3,000. Now you can get them for a couple $100. So I think that point really hits home. I want to take a look at our next slide here, and this is online contribution to the digital basket. Apparel is number one. That surprised me. I thought there would be other categories that would have been at the top spot.
Yeah, it's a great question. And what we do here actually is we've created a digital basket, which sort of represents the basket of things that consumers are buying online. So it's a little bit different than the normal basket that's used for the CPI, because things like gasoline, for example, people don't buy that online. It's in the CPI, it's not in our digital basket. But the items in the basket and the category contribution to the basket is really weighted as a function of what people are buying more of versus less of. And people are buying a lot of apparel. There's a lot of dollar share and actually purchasing share that goes into apparel. And as some categories increase over time, apparel is a really great example, other categories decrease. So computers, people still buy a ton of computers online, but their overall contribution to the digital basket as a whole has actually gone down over the last couple of years as people get more comfortable buying more categories online. And just another interesting point about computers while we're on it, you were talking about flat screen TVs. We've seen a huge increase in online purchases of computers, even just in the past 2 weeks, where our data suggests that there's a 40% increase in people buying computers and peripherals online. No doubt a result of everybody being stuck at home and looking for devices on which they can either be productive or potentially stream content, things to do to keep themselves busy.
All right, and moving on to our last slide here, you're looking at online price changes by category. And specifically comparing the US and UK, is it because our economies are so similar? And what can you discern from this chart?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. So this is another aspect of the digital economy index at Adobe is we are increasing the coverage, the geographic coverage of the categories we include. So here, yes, you see the UK versus the US. And it's interesting because, yeah, the trends are very similar, but not identical. For example, if you look at electronics, one of the things you can see is there's actually been more deflation in electronics online pricing in the UK over the 6 years. The blue line is lower than the yellow line. But for online grocery, the trend is actually the opposite. There's been more price increases in the UK with online groceries than in the US. So we track these things at a category level by region because they can help companies and consumers understand where they can get their best dollars or the most for their dollar, if you will. And it also helps policymakers as they look across these categories and across countries to understand how the digital economy is helping consumers get more or not as much for their digital dollar.
All right, John, great insight as always. Look forward to having you back in studio at MarketSite.
Thank you.
All right, and thanks for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.